Hello and welcome. I'm Reece, and here's what happened this week. We begin with a story that's been developing over the last week, with the latest fallout over a fatal chase between Taiwan's Coast Guard and a Chinese speedboat that left 2 Chinese fishers dead near Taiwan's island of Kinmen. Tiffany Wong brings us the latest.
目前有一艘 A 类高速前进，目前往北京岛前进。
This is the internal communication by Taiwan's Coast Guard, recorded before pursuing a Chinese boat that trespassed into the waters near Taiwan's Kinmen Island. The Coast Guard is using the recording to defend its actions, saying they had the right to pursue the unnamed Chinese boat when it began to speed away. The Coast Guard claimed that the Chinese boat overturned when attempting to flee.
做了一个甩尾，然后不断的碰触的过程，离心力的关系导致这艘陆基快艇失去平衡，翻覆，马上开始展开一个搜救的动作。
The Coast Guard's lack of video evidence has complicated the official investigation, but they maintain that they followed all protocols. The Coast Guard also says it will add recording equipment to all ships in the future. But regardless of the video evidence, Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, which handles matters with China, said that the Coast Guard's actions were in line with standard procedures.
发生了不幸的死亡案件，这个是令人遗憾的，但是我们仍然支持这个海巡署继续执法。
As the surviving Chinese fishers arrived back in China, prosecutors in Kinmen questioned their claim to Chinese media that Taiwan's Coast Guard caused the accident, saying that one of the fishers had testified that they sped up to escape and did not feel a collision when the boat overturned. Prosecutors will continue to examine their testimony.
这2位都有经过海巡署以及本署检察官讯问而且本署检察官讯问的时候有全程录影。
The investigation has aggravated tensions between Taiwan and its neighbor China, which claims the island nation as its own. But it's also sowing divides between political parties in Taiwan, with opposition parties questioning the Coast Guard's version of events, making this Cross-Strait affair also about keeping peace in the country. Eason Pan and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet has issued a warning to anyone who could follow in the footsteps of 2 Taiwanese influencers who faked a kidnapping, only to be found out and thrown in jail.
ហើយសូមពមៀនដល់អ្នកផ្សេងទៀតដែលយកប្រទេសកម្ពុជាធ្វើជាកន្លែងអាជីវកម្មដើម្បីបាន view បានអីរូបភាពបែបនេះណា គឺនឹងអនុវត្តច្បាប់ឲ្យមើងម៉ាត់អនុវត្តជាប់គុក 2 ឆ្នាំហើយចេញទៅបដិញចេញពីប្រទេសឲ្យ blacklist ឈប់ឲ្យចូលស្រុកខ្មែរមួយជីវិត
The 2-year jail term Manet was referring to was the sentence handed to the Taiwanese live streamers. Manet was speaking at the opening of a Chinese-funded bridge construction project. Lawmakers from the US's House Select Committee on China are in Taiwan. Leslie Liao has more from Taipei about their visit.
Another strong show of support from the U.S. as Representative Mike Gallagher leads the delegation here to Taiwan. Gallagher chairs the U.S. House Select Committee on competition between the U.S. and China. He's leading a delegation of 4 other bipartisan lawmakers here. The purpose of the trip is to show support for Taiwan's current and future leadership. The delegation arrived early this morning, and one of the first things they did was meet President Tsai Ing-wen. During that meeting, Mike Gallagher said that Taiwan enjoys bipartisan support, and he also credited President Tsai Ing-wen with making U.S.-Taiwan relations stronger than ever.
Today we've come as Democrats and Republicans to show our bipartisan support for this partnership, which, thanks to your leadership, I think is stronger and more rock solid than ever.
After meeting the president, the delegation met with the current vice president and president-elect Lai Ching-te and his deputy, Bi Kim-hsiao. After that, they met with Taiwan's foreign minister Joseph Wu at the Taipei guest house behind me. But before that meeting, they held a press conference addressing things like continued support for Taiwan, even as U.S. aid to Ukraine wavers, and continuing strong ties no matter the outcome of the U.S.'s upcoming presidential election.
We need to learn the lessons of why deterrence failed in Ukraine, apply them to the Indo-Pacific so that we don't find ourselves having to fight a war. Well, I'm very confident that support for Taiwan will continue regardless of who occupies the White House.
Now, Gallagher is known to be pretty hawkish on China, and his presence here in Taiwan probably goes against the wishes of Beijing, which claims Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory. Now, one of the words that we've been hearing a lot throughout this morning describing U.S.-Taiwan relationship is friend. Now, that's language that Beijing probably won't take nicely to, whether it's in regard to its relationship with the U.S. or Taiwan. John Su, Patrick Sun, and Leslie Liao in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Real wages in Taiwan slumped by just over 1% last year, the biggest drop in over a decade. With the price of goods continuing to rise, Sally Jensen looks at how people are taking the news.
Shopping for some popular food items in Taiwan. But for many, the price of basic goods here is becoming unaffordable.
就是买东西还是会有点感觉到，就是东西有在涨，但是比如说像之前那个蛋价涨了之后就没有再掉回去过了。
钱变薄了，对，钱变薄了。
那你会改变你在买什么东西，还是？
就是外食可能就会想要减少外食的机会这样子。
我有觉得外面的那个餐厅吃饭变蛮贵的，然后菜其实有稍微涨价，所以如果是领基本工资的话，我觉得是应该生活会蛮困难的。
The unit price of this popular brand of root beer is set to increase by around 25%. And while food items getting more expensive is a trend being seen around the world, here in Taiwan, real wages have not kept up with price increases. On Monday, the country's Budget and Statistics Office announced last year's monthly wage figures for the industrial and service sectors, together the biggest employers in Taiwan. Real earnings for both regular wages and non-regular wages, such as part-time pay and bonuses, totaled around $1,695 in 2023, down 1.04% from the previous year, the first decline in 7 years and the largest in 11. That's while the country saw its consumer price index rise 2.5% year on year, the second highest in 15 years. Rapid increase in food prices have been one of the main drivers of inflation around the world in the last few years. And that's in line with what the government here in Taiwan is saying.
那这个部分呢，最主要当然是受到全球经济因素的影响，还有同期物价因素的影响。
Salary adjustment statistics set to be released in May will show whether employers are raising wages in line with price increases. Seeing wages bounce back and consumer prices moderate will be on many shoppers' wish list. Scott Huang and Sally Jensen for TaiwanPlus.
It's not just goods that are seeing price increases. New government data shows Taiwan's landlords are raising rents to new highs too. John Van Trieste looks at why the hikes are unlikely to stop soon.
20 square meters with a bedroom and bathroom, all for just $200 a month. It's such a steal that Ms. Jiang, a new member of Taiwan's workforce, commutes 3 hours a day rather than move.
房租的价格是一直不断在上升，然后变成我们其实如果想要去住靠近工作地点的房子，其实蛮困难，算是蛮困难的一件事情。这样，所以就是短时间内可能暂时不会考虑搬家，还是会选择通勤的方式。
Data backs up what many renters across Taiwan, people like Ms. Jiang, suspect. Since August, the average cost of rent has increased over 2% every month year on year. The rent index gathered by the Government Statistics Office is now at a record high. Real estate market analysts say the rise in rents isn't a coincidence.
目前看起来呢，租金上扬应该会持续高居2%以上了，因为未来的持有税只会增加，不会减少。再加上说，今年因为经济展望比较好的关系，央行的降息几率比较低，所以呢，房东的资金成本也降不下来。
Buying is out of reach for many. Taiwan has some of the world's highest real estate prices relative to wages. In Taipei, an apartment costs almost as much as it would in New York or London, meaning when landlords hike rents, tenants have to grin and bear it. Rent subsidies exist, but getting help can be risky. Some estimates say 70 to 90% of Taiwan's apartments are rented out under the table. Applying for a subsidy would expose these untaxed landlords and put renters at risk of retribution. Housing rights advocates say this black market should be the government's first target in tackling rent prices.
这个部分对房客来讲，无论是租金补贴或者是租金扣抵所得税，这个部分会变成是一个看得到吃不到的一个政策。
But this black market is both long-standing and entrenched, meaning that without political will for change, the burdens renters face will only grow heavier. Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
The number of undocumented migrant workers in Taiwan hit a record high in 2023, and that's triggering concern among labour rights groups. Tiffany Wong takes a closer look at why so many are leaving their employers.
Giving essential support to Taiwan's labor force. There are now over 750,000 migrant workers employed in the country, a record high. But another record is being set for the number of migrant workers who have gone missing. As of 2023, 86,000 migrant workers left their jobs without informing their employment brokers to avoid exorbitant fees and paying off debt, becoming undocumented.
都是因为找不到雇主。因为要付中介的那个买工费很高，大家就已经没工作，哪来的钱？
Migrant worker rights groups say that high broker fees and exploitative practices like illegally holding their passports can leave these workers even more vulnerable to harm. Over the past few years, migrant workers have been calling for an end to hiring through the broker system. In December, the government responded by creating a service center to streamline the employment process and said it will continue to vet broker agencies.
外国中介他没有担任选工的责任，导致有一些移工一进来入境都还没有到雇主处工作报道，他就失联了。引进移工如果失联比率达到规定的标准，我们就会暂时停权他，最短停权1周，那最长的话可以停权到4周。
But workers and advocates say this isn't enough, and as the government signs new labor agreements like the latest with India, that the government will have to do better to protect migrant workers sooner rather than later, to give these migrant workers a reason to continue to dream of a better life in Taiwan. Justin Wu and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
The government says Taiwan has enough medicine to meet the country's needs. New suppliers were being sought for 4 types of medicines last week, including for a cancer treatment and drugs against viral and fungal infections. It sparked concerns among local pharmacists over possible drug shortages. But Taiwan's Food and Drug Administration says there is an adequate supply, and the search for new suppliers is simply a precaution. Taiwan has the highest rate of blood donations in the world, but hospitals are still seeing shortages. Harel Hughes reports.
A short line, quick pinch, and a little squeeze. This blood drive event in Taiwan is popular among donors because after giving blood, they receive a whole duck. Taiwan is the highest rate of blood donations in the world, and events like these, with special giveaways, are a big contributing factor. But Taiwan's hospitals are still facing blood shortages, due in part to Taiwan's aging population.
65岁以前捐血小板可以2个礼拜捐1次，那65岁以后，就只能4个礼拜才能捐1次的。
Another problem is the rate at which supplies here are depleted. Hospitals transfuse up to 4 times more blood than hospitals in the U.S. And with Taiwan's population rapidly aging out of blood donating age, health experts are worried. They say all these problems will be compounded by 2027.
捐血我们有年龄的限制嘛，17岁到65岁。那我们这些中层的捐血人啦，其实到了65岁，可能他就没有办法再捐。20年前，我们大概小于20岁的人可以捐到35万人次，那今年大概只剩下10万。
Taiwan's government is working to address the shortage for the long term, but in the meantime, blood drives with special incentives will have to carry the weight. Andy Shui and Harel Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching Here's What Happened. Finally, take a stroll down the 4-kilometer-long Cherry Blossom Boulevard in Danshui in northern Taiwan. I'm Reece. Take care, and we'll see you next week.